In episode 20 of Communio Sanctorum, we took a look at the hermits, those holy men who headed out to the wilderness to live in isolation from the world. They did so, at first anyway, out of a desire for personal holiness. They found the enticements to sin in the city too great and fled to the wilderness in the hope that temptation would be less of a problem for them. They were encouraged by a popular tract of the time titled The Shepherd of Hermas. It was written about AD 140, and it laid out two routes that one could take in devotion to God, a lower and a higher route. The lower route was said to be the path of faith, hope, and love. It was something that was required of all Christians. But those who aspired to a closer intimacy with God, they could take the higher route. That was the route of self-denial, focused on asceticism, a denial of the demands of the body for things like food, drink, rest, and of course, sex. But the self-denial of the hermits quickly morphed into much more than just saying no to those desires. The body began to be regarded as an enemy. Denial of its desires became a pursuit to dominate it utterly, and pain was seen as evidence that it was being dominated. Hermits pursued ever-increasing means to discomfort themselves. They did things like walling themselves off in caves, or they climbed on top of pillars. They engaged in extreme fasting and tried to stay awake for days at a time. They whipped themselves and began wearing clothes and accessories to clothing that inflicted a low-level constant pain. Now, all of that sounds pretty crazy to us today. Keep in mind that these hermits were considered by many people of that time to be luminous examples of godliness. It was the steady stream of supporters of hermits to their haunts in the wilderness that kept them alive with offerings of food and drink, which the hermits partook of in utmost moderation, just enough to keep them alive to add to their mortification of the flesh. As I share all of this, I suspect that you're wondering why the hermits did this. How had Christians deviated so far from the example that Jesus set? Well, it was a slow process. It began with the infiltration of the world's accepted ideas about the way things are. You see, Greek philosophy had a profound impact on shaping people's worldview, that is, how they understood reality. It was widely accepted in Greco-Roman society that reality was a dualism of spiritual and material. The physical material realm was inherently and unalterably evil, while the realm of the spirit was inherently and unalterably good. Humans were both spirit and body, material. What was good about them was trapped in what was bad. And the key to elevating the good was by depriving the bad, by punishing it. Now, while that's a simplistic explanation for the emergence of hermits, it serves our purposes here. The lesson that we draw from the hermits, I've already alluded to. If being a Christian means following Jesus, where'd the hermits get the idea that meant withdrawing from the world to live in isolation and depriving the body of all forms of pleasure? Jesus certainly never taught that nor modeled it. Yes, he began his ministry by spending 40 days and nights fasting in the wilderness, but not 41 days or 50 or 60. And for the rest of his ministry, he lived among others, eating and drinking. When some asked him why his disciples ate and drank while John the Baptist's disciples fasted often, Jesus responded that it was because he was present with his disciples. There would come a time after he was gone that his followers would fast. But a fast, by its nature, is a set period of time. It's limited. It's not a perpetual lifestyle of deprivation. It doesn't aim intentionally at punishing the body, which is what the hermits were aiming for. The hermits' error was in allowing unbiblical ideas to color their view of faith. Instead of God's word and spirit renewing their minds, the world's false wisdom shaped their ideas on what it meant to be godly. Jesus never told his disciples to live alone in the wilderness. Indeed, he modeled for them perfect godliness, and that was to make his way through the world without the world making its way through him. As we follow Jesus, it behooves us to make sure that we're doing so in a manner consistent with what he wants, not merely in a way that aligns with our culture. There's a lot of this going on right now as progressivism does a massive rewrite of Christian theology. The personal theology of many progressives isn't drawn from who and what God says he is, but from the values of a man-centered secularism. And that is about as opposite from the hermits as you can get. Self-fulfillment, self-realization, self as center and ground of truth now forms the core of contemporary ethics. Human beings no longer exist for God's glory as historic Orthodox Christianity has contended for 2,000 years. Under the progressivist system that arose about, 4 seconds ago, God exists for our glory, to make our lives meaningful. 1,700 years ago, the hermits were wrong in their assumption that genuine godliness was all about the mortification of the flesh. Progressivist and consumerist Christianity today is equally wrong in its exaltation of self.